If you couldn't work for the next 6 months, would your business survive? Would your income continue? Who would have the legal authority to make decisions, and what would happen to your family? Most successful business owners spend years building value, but surprisingly little time protecting it. I'm Carol Dewey, founder of Claris Advisory Partners and the creator of the Navigator system. Each week, we explore strategies designed to help business owners build more valuable companies, preserve more of what they create, and ultimately turn business success into personal freedom. Over the last several episodes, we've been following Sarah. Sarah is a successful business owner who has gradually discovered that success and freedom aren't necessarily the same thing. She learned that having a profitable company didn't automatically make her financially independent. She discovered that she had been the bottleneck inside her own organization. She began developing leaders, documenting processes, and building systems. And eventually, Sarah stopped simply running a business and started building an enterprise. For the first time in years, she could step away. The business could function without her. Its value was increasing, her options were expanding. Sarah finally felt like she was getting ahead. And then something happened that she never planned for. Nothing catastrophic, nothing that destroyed the company, but something serious enough to make her realize that she had spent years building value without spending nearly enough time protecting it. Today's episode is the day everything changed, protecting what you've built before it's too late. So let's dive in. It was 6:17 on a Tuesday morning when Sarah's phone rang. She almost didn't answer. She was getting ready for work. Her coffee was still sitting on the kitchen counter, and calls that early were rarely good news. It was one of her senior managers. There had been an accident. One of Sarah's key executives had been seriously injured on the way home the night before. Fortunately, he was expected to recover, but recovery would take months. And in an instant, someone Sarah depended upon every day was gone from the business. At first, Sarah went into problem-solving mode. That's what entrepreneurs do. Who could handle his responsibilities, which clients needed to be contacted, who had access to the information he managed, what projects were affected, what decisions had been waiting for him. Sarah and her leadership team worked through the immediate issues, and because of the systems she had been building, the company handled the disruption better than it would have a year earlier. That should have made Sarah feel good. Instead, it frightened her, because later that evening, after everyone else had gone home, Sarah sat alone in her office and had a thought she couldn't shake. What if that had been me? It's not a pleasant question, so most business owners avoid it. What happens if something happens to me? We spend enormous amounts of time planning for things we want to happen. Growth, expansion, new clients, higher revenue, a future sale, retirement. But we spend surprisingly little time planning for things we hope never happen. That would be disability, a lawsuit, the loss of a key employee, the death of a partner, a cyber attack, an economic disruption, a family crisis. And that's understandable. Entrepreneurs are optimists by nature. You almost have to be. Nobody starts a business because they're convinced everything will go wrong. But optimism isn't a risk management strategy, and Sarah was beginning to understand that. There's an interesting transition that happens as entrepreneurs become successful. When you're starting out, your primary objective is creation. Create revenue, create customers, create a team, create cash flow, create value. You're playing offense, and you should be. But eventually you accumulate enough that the game changes. Now there's something worth protecting. At that point, offense alone isn't enough. You do need defense. And this is where many successful business owners have a blind spot. They know how to create wealth. They've spent their entire careers doing it. But protecting wealth requires a different way of thinking. It requires asking, where am I vulnerable? What could interrupt this? What happens if I'm wrong? What happens if something happens that I can't control? And perhaps most importantly, have I built a plan that works only when everything goes right? That's a dangerous plan. The next week, Sarah sat down and began looking at her company differently. Not through the eyes of the founder, through the eyes of risk. She started making a list. Her company had liability insurance, good. Cyber coverage, she wasn't entirely sure what it covered. What happened if another key executive disappeared for 6 months? Unclear. What happened if Sarah herself became disabled? The company could operate much better without her than it could a year ago, but who would actually have the legal authority to make certain decisions? What happened to Sarah's ownership interest if she died? Her estate documents had been created years earlier. Were they coordinated with the business? She wasn't sure. What if one of her partners died? Could the deceased partner's spouse suddenly become involved in the business? Who would buy the shares? Where would the money come from? Sarah kept writing, and the list kept getting longer. She wasn't panicking. She was seeing. That's an important distinction. Risk management isn't about becoming afraid of everything that could go wrong. It's about seeing what you couldn't see before. Because once you can see that risk, you can begin deciding what to do about it. When I think about protecting what a business owner has built, I generally think in layers. The first layer is the business itself. What risks exist inside the company? Contracts, employment practices, cybersecurity, liability, key employees, operational disruptions. The second layer is the owner. What happens if the owner becomes disabled? Who has authority? Where does income come from? Can the company continue? The third layer is the family. What happens to the people who depend on the owner? Does the spouse understand the business? Would the family inherit an asset they don't know how to manage? Is there liquidity available? And the fourth layer is the legacy. What ultimately happens to everything you've created? Does it pass intentionally, or does it pass by accident? These layers overlap. That's why insurance alone isn't an asset protection strategy. Legal documents alone aren't an asset protection strategy. Tax planning alone isn't an asset protection strategy. The pieces have to work together. This is where business owners often run into trouble. They have professionals, a CPA, an attorney, an insurance professional, a financial advisor, maybe a business consultant. Every professional may be excellent at what they do. But who's looking at the intersections? The attorney creates documents, the CPA prepares returns, the insurance professional manages policies, the investment advisor manages assets. But sometimes nobody asks whether all those pieces actually work together. That's where blind spots develop. An advisor assumes one advisor or another advisor addressed something. The other advisor assumes it isn't their responsibility. And the business owner assumes someone must have it handled. Until something happens, then everyone discovers the gap at the same time. This is one of the reasons integrated planning has always mattered so much to me, because wealth doesn't exist in departments. Your business decisions affect your taxes affect your personal wealth. Your business ownership affects your estate affects your family. Everything touches everything else. We've been talking through this series about the owner's wealth triangle: business value, tax efficiency, and personal freedom. But here's what Sarah just discovered. You can strengthen all three sides of that triangle and still remain vulnerable if you haven't protected them. You can build tremendous business value, but one lawsuit, one poorly structured agreement, or one unexpected event can threaten it. You can create excellent tax efficiency, but if your estate and business planning aren't coordinated, your family may still face unnecessary complications. You can create personal freedom, but if that freedom depends entirely on everything continuing exactly as planned, it may be more fragile than you think. Protection doesn't replace the owner's triangle. It surrounds it. Think of it as a shield around everything you've built. Here's another important distinction. Business owners sometimes dismiss planning because they believe an event is unlikely. What are the odds? That's usually the wrong question. The better question is, what are the consequences if it happens? The probability of your house burning down may be relatively low. You still insure it. Why? Because the financial consequences could be devastating. Business risk works the same way. We don't plan only for events that are likely. We plan for events whose consequences we cannot comfortably absorb. That's a completely different way of thinking about risk. As Sarah worked through her risk inventory, something became clear. Her biggest vulnerability wasn't any single item on the list. It was that she'd never looked at everything together. She had insurance, she had legal documents, she had financial accounts, she had business agreements, she had advisors. What she didn't have was confidence that all of those pieces were coordinated, and that is a very different problem. Sarah had spent years creating a sophisticated business and planning while maintaining a collection of disconnected personal plans. The business had evolved, her wealth had evolved, her responsibilities had evolved, but parts of her planning still reflected the woman she had been 10 years earlier. That's incredibly common. Your business grows faster than your planning. Your net worth changes. Your family changes. Your team changes. Your goals change. But the documents sitting in the filing cabinet remain exactly the same. Sometimes people think risk management is about fear. I disagree. Done properly, risk management creates confidence. Sarah didn't want to spend her life worrying about everything that could happen. She wanted exactly the opposite. She wanted to know that if something happened, there was a plan. That's freedom. Knowing your family isn't dependent upon you personally solving every problem, knowing the company can survive a disruption, knowing your wealth isn't unnecessarily exposed, knowing your wishes are documented, knowing the right people have authority when they need it. Protection isn't about experiencing disaster. It's about creating resilience, and resilient businesses create options. So here's what I'd encourage you to do. You don't need to solve everything today. Start by asking just 3 questions. First, if I couldn't work for 6 months, what would happen? Not just to the business, to your income, to your family, to your employees. Second, what is the single event that could cause the greatest financial damage to everything I've built? Don't focus only on probability. Think about consequences. And third, when was the last time my legal, tax, insurance, business, and financial planning were reviewed together? Not separately, together. If the answer is never, that may be the most important discovery you make from today's episode. Sarah didn't respond to that early morning phone call by buying every insurance policy she could find. She didn't panic. She didn't radically restructure everything overnight. She did something much smarter. She started asking better questions. She gathered her documents. She reviewed her business agreements. She examined her insurance. She looked at her estate plan. She started identifying where the gaps existed. And she brought the right professionals into the conversation. For the first time, Sarah wasn't simply building wealth. She was intentionally protecting it. And that represented another important step in her transformation. She started as an entrepreneur trying to grow a company. Then she became an owner trying to build value. Then an enterprise builder creating something transferable. And now she was beginning to think like a steward. Someone responsible not only for creating wealth, but protecting what that wealth was intended to accomplish. If you've built a successful business, you've already done something extraordinary. You've created jobs, you've served customers, you've solved problems, you've taken risks most people never will. You've created value where none existed before. But creating something valuable carries another responsibility, protecting it. Not because you're pessimistic, not because you're afraid, but because Too many people now depend on what you've built, your employees, your customers, your family, your future self. Building wealth is about possibility. Protecting wealth is about resilience. And you need both, because the ultimate objective isn't simply creating something valuable. It's making sure the value you've created survives long enough to serve the purpose that you intended for it. I want to thank you for joining me for another episode of The Owner's Playbook. I'm Carol Dewey, founder of Claris Advisory Partners and creator of the Navigator System. If today's conversation made you think about a risk you've been meaning to address, don't ignore that anymore. Don't ignore that thought. You don't have to solve everything today, but you do have to start seeing what may have been overlooked. And in our next episode, we're going to continue Sarah's journey by addressing another problem hiding beneath her success. Because Sarah has built a valuable enterprise, she's begun protecting it. But when she looks at her personal balance sheet, she discovers something troubling. She's still business rich and personally illiquid. We're going to talk about why having millions of dollars of business value doesn't necessarily make you financially independent, and how successful owners begin moving wealth from the business balance sheet to the family balance sheet. And until next time, keep building with purpose, preserve and protect more of what you create, and always play the long game. This is The Owner's Playbook, and we'll see